Hey, want to hear something wild? Imagine being born in a world where every day is basically survival mode, like, for real. No running water, no food deliveries, no AC in the summer. Oh, and there's a plague going around, bandits roaming everywhere, and your emperor? Yeah, he's not even from your country. That was China in the 1300s. Sounds like a nightmare, right? But hold on, it gets better. Out of all that chaos, a guy rises up, and not just any guy. A poor peasant. Homeless. Orphaned. Basically, the unlikeliest hero ever. His name? Zhu Yuanzhang. Here's what I think, this story's got everything. Struggle, rebellion, surprise plot twists, you name it. So let's jump in. Okay, first things first. Zhu wasn't born in some comfy royal palace or anything. Nope. He was born in a little village called Zhongli in 1328. Dirt floors, hungry nights, you get the idea. His family was so poor they couldn't even afford a proper burial when his parents died from a famine. He ended up begging on the streets. Then, get this, he joined a monastery. Not because he wanted to be all holy or anything, but because the monastery had food. Seriously, imagine living in a time where the best career move was becoming a monk just to stay alive. Now, if you think your school cafeteria food was bad, these monks were surviving on thin soup and prayers. And the worst part? The monastery got destroyed by war just a few years later. Like, the one safe spot in his life, gone. Just like that. That's when Zhu was like, alright, enough's enough. And honestly? Can you blame him? So here's the deal. The Mongols had been running China under the Yuan Dynasty since 1271. And let's just say, things weren't going great. The government was corrupt, people were starving, and taxes were insane. Oh, and the Mongols? They kinda saw the local Chinese like background characters in their own empire. Yikes. You won't believe this, but folks were so angry that secret rebel groups started forming all over the place. One of the biggest ones was called the Red Turban Rebellion. Yep, they literally wore red turbans on their heads. Kinda like medieval resistance fashion. And guess who joined them? Our boy Zhu. Now, Zhu didn't exactly have military training. But what he did have? Grit. And a wild sense of timing. He climbed the ranks like nobody's business. His natural smarts and leadership skills stood out big time. Before long, he was leading his own army, fighting off Mongol forces, and rallying folks with this bold new idea: maybe it was time for China to rule itself again. Can you imagine that? One day you're sweeping temple floors, and the next you're giving war orders and building a movement. And here's the twist, he wasn't just in it for revenge. Zhu genuinely wanted a better life for his people. He'd seen the suffering up close. He lived it. So his goal wasn't just to overthrow the Mongols. He wanted to rebuild the entire country from the ground up. Let's be real, that's a huge to-do list. By 1368, Zhu had built such a strong force that he did the unthinkable. He marched into the old capital and kicked the Mongols out. Just like that, the Yuan dynasty was officially over. Bye-bye, Mongol rule. And guess what? Zhu declared himself emperor. Boom. New dynasty. Brand new name, the Ming dynasty. Fun fact, Ming means bright or brilliant. Kinda bold, right? He became the Hongwu Emperor, and let me tell you, he did not waste time. The dude got to work like a man possessed. Okay, here's where things get really interesting. Hongwu was kind of a mix between your super strict grandpa and a hyper-efficient boss. He wanted total control, but also wanted things to run smoothly and fairly. Well, mostly. So what did he do? He set up a crazy detailed government system. We're talking civil service exams, tax reforms, farming rules, even population surveys. The guy was all about order. And the punishments? Oof. Let's just say, you didn't want to mess up. One wrong move and, boom, you could lose your job, your land, or even your head. Still, people respected him. Why? Because after years of chaos, at least things were finally getting cleaned up. Food supplies improved, Cities were rebuilt. Trade slowly started to bounce back. It wasn't perfect, but hey, progress. Here's the funny part. Modern folks? We would not survive under Hongwu. Like, imagine no social media, no freedom of speech, and if you gossip about your boss, it's not just a warning, it's the dungeon. Or worse. Also, remember those civil service exams? Picture the SAT, but 10 times harder and all written with a calligraphy brush. And you might be stuck in a tiny exam cell for 3 days. Yup. 3 days. No bathroom breaks. Just you, your scrolls, and a bowl of cold rice. It's like trying to juggle water while solving calculus. Even after becoming emperor, Xu never really forgot where he came from. He kept his clothes plain, avoided over-the-top luxury, and preferred being feared over being loved. I mean, he once built a spy network so massive that even his top officials didn't know who to trust. Talk about workplace anxiety. But hey, it worked, at least for a while. The Ming Dynasty stabilized. Crops grew. Villages were rebuilt. Bandits? Not so much of a problem anymore. People called it a golden age, though with a few intense footnotes. Well, here's the thing. The Ming Dynasty went on to last almost 300 years. That's a long time to be in charge. And it all started with this one guy who had absolutely nothing. His story? It's not just a rags to riches tale. It's more like rags to absolute monarch, with a few battlefield wins, brutal laws, and giant walls thrown in. It shows how one person, when pushed to the edge, can literally change the course of history. Pretty wild, right? So to recap. Zhu Yuanzhang starts off as a starving orphan. He survives famines, wars, and being broke. He joins a rebellion, climbs the ranks, and eventually becomes emperor. He builds a new government from scratch. And sets the stage for one of China's most iconic dynasties. Not bad for a guy who once had to beg for leftover rice. Next, we're diving into Chapter 2, The Emperor and the Law, where we'll look at how Hongwu went from revolutionary hero to full-on control freak. Spoiler, it gets intense. What do you think so far? Could you see yourself surviving in that world? Or would you've tapped out at the no toilets in the exam cell part? Alright, so we talked about how Zhu Yuanzhang, aka the Hongwu Emperor, rose from dirt-poor peasant to the founder of the Ming Dynasty. Wild, right? Well, now comes the twist. Because once he became emperor, Zhu didn't exactly turn into a chill, easygoing ruler. Nope. If anything, he went full-on my way or the dungeon mode. Think strict dad energy, but with absolute power and a really big army. Here's what I think. Hongwu was trying to fix a broken empire, but the way he did it? Let's just say it wasn't all sunshine and dumplings. Let me explain that. So, picture this. Hongwu's in charge of a massive country. China wasn't just one city or region, it was huge. Millions of people, hundreds of towns, tons of languages and local customs. And he's like, okay, how do I make sure nobody rebels, nobody steals, and everyone does their job? Yeah. Good luck with that. So what did he do? He started laying down rules. And I don't mean a few polite guidelines. I'm talking massive reforms, super detailed laws, and a lot of control. Like, if the Ming government had a slogan, it'd probably be, do exactly as we say, or else. This part is actually kinda impressive. Hongwu created an official legal code called the Ming Lu, which basically means the Great Ming Code. And wow! This thing was huge. It covered everything: taxes, farming, marriage, crime, land ownership, even clothing rules. Seriously, they had laws about what color belt you could wear depending on your social status. Fashion police, Ming style. You steal a chicken? There's a rule for that. You disrespect your parents? There's a rule for that too. And yeah, they took the whole honor your elders thing very seriously. But hey, at least it was consistent. The Ming Code actually helped organize society and reduce random punishments. Before that, officials just kinda made stuff up as they went. Still, some of the punishments? Oof. Rough. Now, here's where it gets kinda dark. Hongwu had been through a lot. Poverty, war, betrayal, you name it. So once he had power, he got a little paranoid. Like, constantly afraid that people were out to get him. Which led to this fun little activity called, Let's Purge the Government. You won't believe this, but during one purge, he had over 30,000 officials executed. 30,000. That's not cleaning house, that's burning the whole village down. His reasoning? Better to kill 100 innocent people than let one traitor live. Yikes. Let's be real, that's not exactly a motivational poster quote. Hongwu didn't stop there. He created his own private spy agency, the Jinyui. These were like ninja detectives in embroidered uniforms. They could arrest people, interrogate them, and even execute them, without a trial. Basically, hey, your neighbor said something shady about the emperor. Boom, disappeared. Imagine living like that today. You post one meme making fun of your boss, and the next thing you know, you're being interrogated by silk-robed ninjas. Not ideal. People were so scared, they started keeping their conversations to whispers. Even in their own homes. Can you imagine that? Whispering at dinner because the emperor might be listening? Talk about trust issues. Here's the thing, Hongwu didn't just make laws and rules. He wanted to personally control everything. And I mean everything. He got rid of the position of prime minister. Why? Because he thought they might get too powerful. Instead, he put himself at the top of every decision. Military, taxes, agriculture, you name it, he had the final say. It's like trying to run a whole empire and still being the one who answers customer service emails. Effective? Maybe. Exhausting? Absolutely. He even sent out instructions on how farmers should plant their crops. Like, make sure your rice rows are exactly this long. Dude was running a country and micromanaging farmers. Chill, Hongwu. Just a little. Now, I know what you're thinking, this guy sounds like a control freak with anger issues. And you're not wrong. But it wasn't all doom and gloom, in a weird way. Hongwu's harsh rules actually brought stability. For the first time in years, bandits weren't running wild. Roads were safer. Trade picked up. Crops were growing. People knew what to expect, even if the rules were strict. Think of it like this. If the Yuan Dynasty was a chaotic group project with no leader, the early Ming Dynasty was that one super intense classmate who takes over and makes you color-code the spreadsheet. Annoying? Maybe. But at least the project got finished, honestly. I don't think most of us would last a week under Hongwu's rule. Here's why. Can't criticize the government. Like, at all. No freedom of speech, no voting, no YouTube rants. Accidentally breaking a rule? Might lose your head. Oh, and don't even think about skipping work or being lazy. You could get publicly beaten for slacking off. Even holidays weren't super chill. You'd better celebrate them the right way, or face a fine. Yeah. A fine for celebrating wrong. It's like living in a super strict group chat, but the admin can literally send soldiers to your house. So, why was Hongwu so intense? Here's my take, he was scared. Scared that the empire he built from nothing could fall apart overnight. Scared of traitors. Scared of corruption. Scared of going back to that starving orphan kid he used to be. So he tried to control everything. Because to him, control meant safety. And peace. And to be fair, it worked, for a while. The Ming Dynasty didn't just survive. It thrived. At least in the beginning. But ruling by fear? That always comes with a price. Get ready for coups, palaces, and ocean voyages. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. So, what do you think so far? Would you survive a day in the Hongwu Emperor's court? Or would you fake a cold and hide under your floorboards? Okay, so remember how we left off with the Hongwu Emperor being super strict, a little paranoid, and basically running the empire like it was his personal to-do list? Well, here's the thing, he eventually died. Spoiler alert, all emperors do. And when he did, the big question was, who's taking over? Seems simple, right? Like, Just pick your favorite kid and hand over the throne, but this is the Ming Dynasty we're talking about. And nothing is ever that simple. So, Hongwu had a bunch of sons. He was an emperor, after all. But his favorite son, the one he thought was super wise and capable, died before he did. Oof, that left his grandson, Yunwen, to take over. This guy was pretty young, kinda idealistic, and super into Confucian values like kindness, peace, and doing the right thing, which honestly sounds nice, right? Well, not everyone thought so. Especially one of Hongwu's other sons, Zhu Di. Let me paint you a picture. Zhu Di was not your average uncle. He was a seasoned general, commanding the army in the north, and basically had a fan club of loyal soldiers. He was strong, smart, and, let's be real, a bit of a control freak. When Yunwen, the grandson, took the throne and became the Hongwu Emperor, one of the first things he tried to do was, you guessed it, limit the power of his uncles. And Zhu Di? He was like, I don't think so. You won't believe this, but Zhu Di literally faked a mental breakdown. He pretended to go nuts to avoid suspicion while he gathered forces behind the scenes. Talk about drama, it's like the medieval version of I'm totally fine, nothing suspicious here, while secretly building an army in your basement. BY 1399, Zhu Di had enough. He launched a rebellion against his own nephew. Yup, family dinner was officially cancelled. For 3 years, they fought in what's called the Jingnan campaign. Zhu Di played it smart, he took his time, built support, and moved in carefully. The guy knew how to play chess while everyone else was still learning checkers. Finally, in 1402, Zhu Di took the capital, claimed the throne, and became emperor. What happened to the young Hongwu Emperor, no one knows for sure. Some say he died in the palace fire. Others say he escaped and lived in hiding. Either way, Zhu Di didn't exactly hang up a missing nephew poster. Let's be real, this was one messy family feud. So now Zhu Di's on the throne. And he gives himself a new name, Hongwu Emperor. It means perpetual happiness, which is kinda ironic, considering how he got there, but you know what? He turned out to be one of the most ambitious emperors in Chinese history. The guy didn't just want to rule. He wanted to impress the world, and he totally did. So, first thing on his list? Let's build a new capital. Because sure, why just redecorate when you can relocate the whole royal operation? He moved the capital from Nanjing to Beijing, which was closer to the northern border and easier to defend from Mongols, and while he was at it, he built a palace. Well, the palace, the Forbidden City, okay, this place? Insane. Just insane. It took over 1 million workers to build. Giant red walls, golden roofs, marble stairs, it was like the emperor's version of go big or go home. Except he already was home. The name Forbidden City isn't just for show. Regular people weren't allowed inside. Not even nobles could wander around freely. It was like the VIP lounge of ancient China, with extra velvet ropes. Just imagine, thousands of rooms, massive courtyards, guards everywhere, and a rulebook thicker than a dictionary. You could literally get punished for walking on the wrong side of the hall. Let's be honest, most of us wouldn't last a day there without accidentally breaking 15 rules. It's like being trapped inside the world's fanciest library, but with death penalties for whispering too loudly. Still, it worked. The Forbidden City became the heart of Ming politics, power, and style. And it stayed that way for over 500 years, not bad for a palace built out of a power move. Now here's where things get really cool. Yongle didn't just want to rule China. He wanted everyone else to know China was boss. So what did he do? He sent out ships, big ships, giant ships. These things were so massive, modern historians still argue about how they were even possible. Some of them were said to be over 400 feet long. That's longer than a football field. These fleets were led by a guy named Jing He, a Muslim eunuch admiral who was basically the Chinese version of James Bond meets Indiana Jones. They sailed to India, Arabia, and Africa. Carried silk, porcelain, and letters from the emperor saying, hey, just letting you know, we're kind of a big deal. The missions weren't about conquering, they were about showing off. China wasn't there to take over. They just wanted tribute. You give us cool gifts, we'll give you some nice stuff back, and you acknowledge how awesome we are. It was ancient diplomacy, with serious swagger. What did the world think? Well, people were impressed. Really impressed, imagine seeing a fleet of massive ships roll into your port, with colorful sails, treasure, and exotic animals. Oh yeah, they brought back giraffes. Giraffes. The emperor was like, neat. Let's put it in the royal zoo. Meanwhile, most people outside China didn't even know what was going on. Europe? Still recovering from the Black Death and fumbling with feudalism. China? Sending giraffes by boat. It's like comparing a flip phone to a spaceship. So with all these projects, you'd think the Ming Dynasty was unstoppable, right? Well, not quite. Here's the thing about Yonghua, as ambitious as he was, all those mega projects drained the empire's bank account. Building palaces, sending ships halfway across the planet, moving the capital, it all cost serious cash. And while the emperor was out flexing, back home, people were getting tired. The economy started feeling the strain. Taxes crept up. Peasants weren't exactly rolling in riches. Also, those overseas voyages. After Yonghua died, they pretty much stopped. Why? Because later emperors were like, this is really expensive, and we're not even conquering anything. Let's just stay home. Which is kinda sad, right? China had the ships, the maps, the muscle, and then they turned around and parked it all. Just imagine what the world would look like if they'd kept exploring. We might all be drinking tea from blue and white porcelain right now. So what did Yonghua leave behind? Let's count. A stunning capital that still stands today. A legacy of power and ambition. Massive ships that made Europe look like toddlers in rowboats. Oh, and a palace so fancy, even modern billionaires would be jealous. But also, a reminder that being too ambitious comes with a price. The Ming Dynasty soared high under Yonghua, but it also started showing cracks. Cracks that would get deeper later. Still, you gotta admit, Yonghua's reign? Epic. Let's see. If you were rich and obedient, you'd love it. If you were poor and outspoken, good luck. If you got seasick, definitely don't join Jingyi's crew. And forget about casual Fridays. You mess up one ritual at the Forbidden City, and it's off with your head. No pressure, right? But hey, if you were into order, ambition, and giraffes, Yonghua's era was your jam. So now we've met the powerful founder Hongwu and his wildly ambitious son Yonghua, but what happens when the shine starts to wear off? That's where we're heading next. We'll look at the slow fall from grace, corruption, weak emperors, and a little thing called pirates. Yup, even China had to deal with pirates. Ready to keep going? So, things were looking pretty sharp after Yonghua's time, right? Big palaces, giant ships, giraffes chilling in royal gardens. China was riding high. But here's the thing. Even the strongest dynasties have a shelf life. And after all the glitz and glory, cracks slowly started to show in the Ming armor. Nothing crazy at first, just little signs, like a suspicious noise in your car that you ignore until smoke starts coming out of the hood. You know that feeling when you're holding something fragile, and you try to act normal, but inside you're like, please don't break, please don't break. That was kinda the vibe in the mid-Ming period. On the surface, the empire still looked powerful. But underneath? A whole mess was bubbling. One of the biggest issues? Corruption. And not the cute kind where your friend cheats at Monopoly. We're talking serious, slimy, bribe-taking, embezzling kind of corruption. Officials started caring more about lining their own pockets than actually doing their jobs. The emperor would send money for rebuilding roads, and somehow it would disappear. Where did it go? Oh look, the official's nephew just bought a mansion. Weird coincidence, right? What made it worse was that many emperors after Yonghua, well, they kind of checked out. Some of them were straight up not interested in ruling. Like one emperor. He literally locked himself in the palace and refused to come out. He just sat in his workshop, carving wooden toys. 4 years. Not joking, can you imagine running an empire while your boss is just in the back making little wooden trinkets? It's like your manager disappearing during rush hour to build a birdhouse. Super helpful. Meanwhile, the government was still massive. Tons of paperwork, officials everywhere, court rituals that took all morning just to say good morning properly. And the poor emperor's ministers? They couldn't make any real decisions without getting slapped down. So the government became this huge, sluggish machine where nothing got done unless you paid someone off. Now, here's where things get wild. While everyone in the palace was busy writing poems and figuring out which robe matched the dragon embroidery rules, the outside world was moving fast. Pirates started creeping in along the coast. Yup, pirates. Not the Johnny Depp kind. These guys were rough, organized, and had no chill. They raided villages, stole supplies, and made life miserable for anyone trying to live near the sea. And the Ming government? They weren't exactly fast to respond. It was like, oh no, coastal towns are being attacked. And the response would be, please submit a complaint in triplicate and wait 6 months. Super helpful, again, and if that wasn't bad enough, bandits were popping up in the countryside. Why? Because people were starving. And when people starve, they don't wait politely in line. They grab pitchforks and start taking matters into their own hands, but here's the kicker, the Ming rulers still insisted everything was fine. You know those moments when someone's house is literally on fire, and they're like, it's a little warm in here? That was the Ming court, and don't even get me started on the taxes. Peasants were being squeezed so hard they were practically bleeding rice. Some couldn't even afford to plant crops because they knew the government would just take it all. So they gave up. Walked off their land. Became beggars, thieves, or just vanished into the mountains. In natural disasters. Yep. Famines, floods, droughts, you name it. It was like nature itself was mad at the Ming Dynasty. People started saying, maybe the heavens are upset. Which, in old-school Chinese belief, was a big deal. Losing the mandate of heaven wasn't just a poetic phrase, it was basically the divine way of saying, you're fired. Now, let's pause here and do a reality check. Would any of us survive this mess? Imagine living in a village where pirates attack 1 week, tax collectors show up the next, then a flood wipes out your rice field. And the government's like, don't worry, the emperor just ordered a new mural for his dragon room. Let's be real, half of us can't survive a power outage, let alone a year of drought and pirates. No DoorDash, no internet, just you, your muddy hut, and a lot of angry neighbors. Even the soldiers were struggling. Back in Yongl's day, the military was sharp, disciplined, and feared. But by now, a lot of them were farmers in armor. Underpaid, underfed, and barely trained. Some even sold their weapons to make extra cash. You know it's bad when the army has to borrow swords, and yet, the government still threw lavish ceremonies, celebrated imperial birthdays with golden fireworks, and acted like everything was sunshine and lotus petals. Total disconnect. It's like hosting a fancy dinner party in a house that's literally sinking. One of the more painful parts of this era was watching how common people suffered while officials sat in luxury. Rich families had silk robes, exotic foods, and private gardens, while peasants were boiling tree bark for soup. Actual soup. From trees. Not even the good kind. The divide between rich and poor got so huge, it wasn't a gap anymore, it was a canyon. And it kept growing. But just when things seemed like they couldn't get worse, guess what? They did. In the late Ming period, something unexpected started to creep in, foreign pressure. Remember how the Europeans were doing their own thing back in the 1400s and 1500s? Well, now they were starting to show up at China's doorstep, knocking on the door with cannons. The Portuguese were among the first. They showed up like, hi, we'd like to trade. And the Chinese officials were like, no thanks. So the Portuguese just kind of stayed. Eventually, they got a foothold in Macau, and other foreigners started following. You could almost hear China going, wait, who invited you? But it was too late. Meanwhile, internal rebellion was brewing like a storm cloud. One of the biggest troublemakers? A guy named Li Zicheng, a former postal worker turned rebel leader. Yeah. A mailman took down an empire. Wild, right? Li Zicheng wasn't alone. All across China, rebel groups were rising up. They were sick of taxes, sick of corruption, and definitely sick of being ignored. They wanted change and they weren't asking politely. And the Ming court? Still too busy arguing over astrology and paperwork to notice the whole house was falling apart. Eventually, in 1644, it all came crashing down. Li Zicheng's forces stormed Beijing, and the last Ming emperor, emotionally drained, politically cornered, hung himself on a tree near the palace, that was it. Over 270 years of rule, gone. Just like that. Of course, the story doesn't end there. A new dynasty was waiting in the wings, the Qing. But that's a tale for another time. Back to the Ming for a second though. What's wild is how much potential they had. With a strong start, big brains, incredible culture, and some of the best art and engineering of the age, they could have lasted even longer. But ambition, pride, and a blind eye to the common people? That's what really cracked the walls. Still, the Ming dynasty left a serious legacy. Blue and white porcelain? Still iconic. The Forbidden City? Still standing. And that whole vibe of discipline, order, and high standards? Yeah, it's baked into Chinese culture to this day. It's kind of like a tragic hero in a movie. Brilliant, talented, but couldn't get out of their own way, and honestly, it makes for one heck of a story. Next up, we dive into what happens after the Ming. The power vacuum, the scramble for control, and the arrival of a whole new set of rulers. It's like flipping the page in a fantasy novel and realizing there's another kingdom waiting to rise. Okay, so picture this. The Ming dynasty just collapsed like a badly built tower of Jenga blocks. Li Zicheng and his rebel crew had stormed Beijing. The last Ming emperor? Gone. Just like that. So, who's in charge now? Well, here's where things get messy. Imagine someone throwing a pie into the middle of a room full of politicians, soldiers, rebels, and foreign warriors and then shouting, "Who wants to be king?" That's basically what China looked like right after the Ming fell. Li Zicheng thought he had it in the bag. He rolled into Beijing thinking, alright, I guess I'm emperor now. But here's the thing, he wasn't exactly everyone's cup of tea. A lot of people saw him as just a rebel with a sword, not a legit leader. He tried to run things, but running an empire isn't like running a rebel army. You can't just yell at officials and expect rice to appear in markets. Plus, his troops? Not super disciplined. They went around looting, causing chaos, basically acting like kids left unsupervised in a candy store. So instead of bringing peace, Li Zicheng stirred up more fear. People were like, wait, this guy's worse than the last one. And while that circus was going on, there was another powerful group quietly waiting in the wings, the Manchus. Now, the Manchus were a whole different story. They lived northeast of China, in what's now sort of modern-day Manchuria. They weren't Han Chinese, but they had been keeping an eye on things for a long time. Think of them like the neighbor who watches your house a little too closely when you're on vacation. For years, they'd been preparing, organizing, and building up strength. And when they saw China's capital basically lying there with the front door open and the lights off, they thought, this might be our chance. But here's the twist, they didn't march straight in. They got invited. Yeah, invited. Remember the Ming loyalists? They weren't ready to give up yet. One of the top generals, Wu Sangui, had been holding the Great Wall against invaders. When he saw Beijing fall to Li Zicheng, he had a decision to make: join the rebels? Nope. Try to take over himself? Too risky. So what did he do? He opened the gates of the Great Wall and let the Manchus in. I'm not even joking. This guy literally opened the door for the next dynasty. Can you imagine that? Guarding the wall your whole life and then saying, come on in. It's like being a bouncer at a club and then handing your headset to a guy outside and saying, you run it now. Once inside, the Manchus moved fast. They took Beijing, kicked out Li Zicheng, who fled and eventually vanished, and crowned their own emperor. And just like that, the Ming were out, and the Qing dynasty was in. Now, here's where things get interesting. The Manchus were smart. They knew they were outsiders, and that made people nervous. So they didn't just try to erase everything Ming. Nope, they kept a lot of Chinese traditions. Confucianism? Still there. The imperial exam system? Still going strong. Even the style of the government? Pretty similar, but they also brought their own style. And that's where things got a bit prickly. First off, the queue. Not the British lineup kind, but the hairstyle. The Manchus forced all Han Chinese men to shave the front of their heads and wear the rest in a long braid. It was a symbol of loyalty to the Qing. No queue, no peace. Literally, people hated this. It wasn't just a haircut, it was identity. Being told how to wear your hair by foreign rulers? That stung. But the Manchus weren't playing around. Refuse the hairstyle? Off with your head. Yeah, they weren't subtle, but over time, the Qing proved they weren't just invaders, they actually knew how to rule. And not just rule, but rule well. The early Qing emperors were sharp, focused, and big on stability. They wanted to fix what the late Ming had broken. Roads got repaired. Farms got support. Taxes got reorganized finally. And get this, under Qing rule, China grew. A lot. In population, in territory, in trade. It wasn't instant, but things started to calm down. It's like finally cleaning your house after a massive party. There's still broken glass in the carpet, but at least the music's off and you can hear yourself think, back to the Manchus, though, they weren't just chilling in palaces. They actually shared power. Han Chinese scholars still held top positions. The Qing weren't like, it's all about us now. They were more like, okay, let's run this place together, but don't forget who's boss. That balance worked, at least for a while, and here's a weird thing. Even though the Qing were outsiders, many people started to see them as more stable than the late Ming. Why? Because they were present. The emperors actually did their jobs. Unlike that one Ming emperor who played with wooden toys all day, Qing emperors showed up, read reports, gave orders, and even led military campaigns. Imagine that, an emperor actually doing emperor stuff. Let's take a quick moment to imagine living in that transition era, though. One day you're told to worship the Ming emperor. The next, he's gone. Then rebels are in charge. Then the rebels are gone, and now it's some people from the north with horsehair robes and strict new hair rules. Your taxes change, your local officials change, your flag changes. It's like switching schools, cities, and families all in 1 week. Most people just wanted peace. They were tired of rebellion, war, and chaos. So, even if the Manchus were different, as long as they kept the rice flowing and bandits away, folks started to adjust. It wasn't all smooth sailing, though. There were still loyalists, people who swore they'd bring the Ming back no matter what. Some of them fled south. Some went to Taiwan. Yep, that Taiwan. It became a hot spot for Ming holdouts. It was like the last campfire of resistance, and it stayed that way for years. Even after most of the mainland had accepted the Qing, little corners of resistance kept fighting. It's like that one friend who refuses to believe a show was cancelled. The Ming will be back next season. Nope. It was over. But the hope? It lingered. Eventually, those loyalist pockets faded, and the Qing solidified their rule. But those early years, wow, what a roller coaster. Power shifting hands like a game of hot potato. From rebels to generals to foreign warriors, all within a few years. It was intense. And the way the Qing handled it? Surprisingly strategic. They could have crushed everything and started fresh. But instead, they blended strength with flexibility. Like, yeah, we're new, but we're not here to wreck the place, we're here to keep the lights on. Smart move, that's what really helped them last. While the Ming collapsed under the weight of corruption and inaction, the Qing built themselves up by being present and practical. And they weren't afraid to make tough calls, even unpopular ones, like that brutal hairstyle rule, but it sent a message: we're serious, and we're here to stay. Next, we'll dive into the golden years of the Qing, the part where China gets bigger, culture flourishes, trade booms, and emperors with serious leadership chops take the spotlight. You're gonna meet guys like Kangxi and Qianlong, emperors who didn't just sit on thrones, they owned the stage. It's about to get even more fascinating, so stay tuned. So, we're past the chaos. The dust from the fall of the Ming has settled. The Manchus are in power now, and the Qing dynasty is officially running the show. But here's the surprise: not only did they take over, they actually did a pretty amazing job. Like, unexpectedly amazing. Enter Emperor Kangxi. This guy? Total rock star. Imagine someone who's part military genius, part book nerd, part peacemaker, part power broker. Yeah, that was him. And get this, he became emperor at just 7 years old. 7. At that age, most kids are still figuring out how not to spill juice on themselves. Of course, he didn't actually rule when he was 7. There were regents in charge at first. But by the time he hit his teens, Kangxi had already kicked out a corrupt regent and said, "I got this." And honestly, he did. He ruled for over 60 years, which is like 3 Netflix generations. What made Kangxi such a big deal? Well, let's start with his brain. The guy was smart. He studied Confucian classics, math, astronomy, even Western science. He invited Jesuit missionaries to his court, not to convert, but to learn from them. Can you imagine that? A Qing emperor chatting about star charts with Europeans in the Forbidden City, but don't let the scholar vibe fool you, he was also a warrior. He personally led troops into battle, crushed rebellions, and pushed back threats from places like Mongolia and Russia. You read that right, he went personally. Like, put on armor and ride a horse type of emperor. Total legend. And back home? He worked non-stop to stabilize the empire. He simplified the tax system, made sure local officials were held accountable, and helped restore trust in the government. People were exhausted from years of instability, so having a steady hand at the top really mattered. And here's a fun little detail, Kangxi loved to travel. Not just for fun, but to understand his people. He'd go on inspection tours, long trips across the empire, to see what was really going on. No filtered reports. Just dusty roads, tea with village elders, and plenty of handwritten notes. It's like the ancient version of Undercover Boss, except the boss was the emperor and everyone definitely recognized him. Kangxi's reign was like hitting the reset button on a glitchy system. Things started working again. Farmers got support. Schools reopened. The economy picked up. People weren't living in fear of war or sudden government collapse anymore. They could just live, but here's the best part, after Kangxi passed, his grandson Qianlong eventually took the throne. And guess what? The dude kept the good vibes going. It's like when one awesome CEO steps down and the next one is also awesome. Doesn't happen often, right? Qianlong was another long-reigning emperor. He ruled for almost 60 years, too. And under him, China reached its peak in size, wealth, and cultural richness. Seriously, the empire was huge. At its height, it covered something like 1/3 of Asia. You could walk for months and still be in Qing territory. Try doing that today without your phone dying. So what did Qianlong do with all that power? First off, he focused on art and culture. The guy was a poet, a calligrapher, a painter. He even wrote thousands of poems. Not all of them were good, some were kinda meh, if we're being honest, but he loved doing it. His court became a cultural hotspot. Think of it as the ultimate creative writing club with palaces and silk robes. He also collected stuff. And by stuff, I mean everything. Paintings, ancient texts, rare scrolls. He built massive libraries. He wanted to preserve Chinese history, and he wasn't playing around. At one point, he launched a huge project to gather and edit all the important books of Chinese culture and philosophy. They literally created an encyclopedia bigger than some modern countries' libraries, but it wasn't all poems and paper. Qianlong, like Kangxi, was also a strong military leader. He expanded the empire into Tibet, Xinjiang, and even made sure pesky neighbors stayed in line. You don't get to rule 1/3 of Asia by just sitting around writing haikus. Now, let's take a step back. What was life like for regular people during this golden age? Well, things were better. Not perfect, but a lot more stable. Crops were growing, villages were safer, and local markets were buzzing. Population boomed, so much so that cities started getting crowded, and rural areas saw more farming innovation just to keep up with all the hungry mouths. But, and this is where it gets funny for us modern folks, daily life still wasn't exactly a walk in the park. You had to grow your own food or buy it fresh every single day. No fridges. No microwave. No Uber Eats. If you didn't plan ahead, you were literally going to bed hungry. Need to go somewhere? Hope you like walking. Or maybe a bumpy ride on a donkey cart if you were lucky. No cars, no bikes, no scooters. Just legs and patience. And forget Wi-Fi. People entertained themselves with storytelling, music, and tea. Lots of tea. If you wanted gossip, you went to the tea house. It was like the internet, except slower and with more steam. Also, hygiene. Let's be real, Bathing was not a daily thing. Soap was rare in plumbing? Ha! You either washed in a river or a bucket, and shared both with your whole family. Your great-grandma's shampoo day was probably once a month, on a good month. Still, despite the rough conditions by today's standards, people were thriving for that time. Kids went to school, families grew food, cities became cultural centers, and trade routes connected towns and countries. It was a time of peace and pride. The Qing court was showing the world that China was not only powerful, but sophisticated. Foreigners were starting to take notice too. Traders and diplomats from Europe started showing up, hoping to get a slice of the Chinese market. And while the Qing weren't super interested in outside products, they had most of what they needed. They were open to some interaction, as long as it was on their terms. Now, Qianlong had a bit of an ego, let's be honest. One time, a British ambassador tried to negotiate trade terms. Qianlong basically told him, "Thanks, but we're good." In a super formal letter, he said China had everything it needed and didn't really want British goods. It sounds arrogant now, but back then? Kinda fair. China was the center of a huge empire with a self-sustaining economy. Why import wool when you have silk? Or tin pots when your artisans are making porcelain masterpieces? So things were going pretty great. But, and there's always a but in history, some cracks were starting to show. For one, population growth was booming so fast that it began to strain resources. More people meant more pressure on land, food, and jobs. It wasn't a crisis yet, but you could feel the tension building, and while Qianlong was an effective emperor, he started slowing down in his later years. He ruled longer than he probably should have. Toward the end, he let some shady officials rise in power. Corruption crept in like a leaky pipe, small at first, but slowly making a mess. Still, let's not jump ahead just yet. This era, this golden slice of Qing history, was remarkable. It was a time of strength, creativity, and pride. People had survived civil war, foreign takeover, and dynastic collapse, and come out the other side stronger. It was like the empire had hit refresh and actually loaded properly this time. Next, we'll start to see how those small cracks grew bigger, how external pressure from Europe, internal unrest, and the weight of tradition would eventually challenge everything the Qing had built. But for now, take a breath. This was China at its brightest. Big, bold, confident, and totally in its prime. Alright, so the Qing dynasty is still rolling strong, right? We've had Kangxi, we've had Qianlong, and things have been mostly smooth sailing. But, and you probably saw this coming, nothing lasts forever. This is the part of the story where things slowly start to slip, and the empire begins to crack around the edges. Not all at once, but little by little, like a teacup getting hairline cracks you don't even notice until it suddenly breaks in your hand. Let's start with something small but important: population. Remember how I said things were booming? Yeah, maybe too much. By the 1800s, China's population had exploded to over 300 million. That's a lot of people to feed, clothe, house, and give jobs to. It was like stuffing an entire stadium into a backyard party. Eventually, someone's gonna trip over the grill. The problem was that while the number of people shot up, the resources didn't. Land was getting overused, and farms were being split into tinier and tinier pieces. You'd have 4 brothers trying to grow enough rice on a plot the size of a modern parking space. And if one season went bad, boom, famine, poverty, maybe even rebellion. It was a ticking time bomb, and the Qing government didn't quite know how to defuse it. Meanwhile, remember how Qianlong had started slipping in his later years? That didn't magically fix itself. His successors weren't exactly powerhouses. Some of them tried, sure. But overall, the leadership just wasn't as sharp anymore. Imagine if your favorite TV show got handed off to a new writer who kinda sorta read the old script but didn't really get it. That was the Qing court after Qianlong, and speaking of not getting it, enter the Europeans. Now they were on the rise. Britain had gone full industrial revolution, and they were pumping out goods, ships, weapons, you name it. And what did they want to do with all that stuff? Sell it, of course. They looked at China, saw a billion tea drinkers and silk lovers, and thought, jackpot. But here's the twist. China wasn't really interested. The Qing court still saw themselves as the center of the world. They thought, why would we need foreign junk? We've got porcelain, paintings, and Confucian wisdom. To be fair, they had a point, but it also meant they totally underestimated how persistent the West was going to be. So the British got clever. They knew the Chinese loved silver and tea. They were basically addicted to tea at this point, like 3 cups a day level obsession. So the British found a way to balance trade: opium. Yep. That's where this is going. They started smuggling opium from India into China. At first, it was small. A few traders here and there. But the demand exploded. People got hooked fast. It was cheap, addictive, and spread like wildfire. Within a few decades, millions were using it. And we're not talking about an occasional puff here. This was hardcore addiction. It wrecked health, broke families, and drained silver from China like someone poked a hole in the treasury. Now, here's where the Qing government actually did try to step in. One official, Lin Zexu, absolute legend, took the fight seriously. He cracked down on the opium trade hard. Confiscated tons of the stuff and literally dumped it into the sea. Which, let's be honest, was kind of a power move, but Britain didn't love that. British merchants complained. The government got involved. And before you know it, boom, opium war. Now, let me pause here. You might be thinking, wait, a war? Over drugs? Yep. The British basically went to war because they weren't allowed to keep selling a harmful drug. Wild, right? So the Opium War kicks off in 1839. And the Qing? They were not ready. Their navy was outdated, their weapons were old school, and their strategy was stuck in the past. Meanwhile, the British had steamships and cannons that could level a fort in minutes. It wasn't even close. The war ended in 1842 with the Treaty of Nanjing, and let me tell you, China got the short end of the stick. They had to open up ports to foreign trade, hand over Hong Kong to the British, and pay a massive fine. And that was just the start. More unequal treaties followed. Other countries, France, Russia, the US, wanted in on the action too. China suddenly went from the proud center of the world to a divided, exploited mess, and people noticed. Ordinary folks saw their country being bullied and humiliated, and they were not happy. This frustration boiled over in a massive rebellion, the Taiping Rebellion. Okay, so this part is nuts. The leader of the rebellion? A guy named Hongwu. He failed the imperial exams a bunch of times and had some sort of vision or mental breakdown, depending on how you look at it, where he believed he was the younger brother of Jesus. Yes, really that he started preaching a strange mix of Christianity and Chinese values. At first, people were like, okay, weird but whatever. But then he started gaining followers. A lot of them. His movement promised land for the poor, equality for women, and the end of corruption. And people, desperate and angry, ate it up. Within a few years, the Taiping Rebellion exploded into one of the bloodiest civil wars in history. Over 20 million people died. That's more than World War I. It was chaos, cities were destroyed, farmland burned, families torn apart. The Qing government eventually crushed the rebellion, but it left the country shattered. And here's the worst part, they had to rely on local armies and foreign support to win. Which meant the central government got even weaker. It was like winning a fight but needing someone else to throw the punches for you. Doesn't exactly scream strong leadership, right? Meanwhile, more rebellions popped up. Muslim uprisings, ethnic revolts, it was like the empire was unraveling thread by thread. And the Western powers? They were still pushing in. More demands, more ports, more control. Missionaries flooded in. Railroads and telegraph lines were built, not for Chinese benefit, but for foreign convenience. So what did the Qing try to do about all this? Reform. Sort of, they launched something called the self-strengthening movement. The idea was simple, let's modernize our weapons and tech, but keep our Confucian values. Sounds reasonable. They built factories, bought Western ships, even sent students overseas, but it wasn't enough. The reforms were too slow, too limited, and often blocked by conservative officials who didn't want change. It's like trying to fix a sinking ship with a teaspoon, and to make matters worse, the imperial court was being steered by Empress Dowager Cixi, one of the most controversial figures in Chinese history. Some people say she was brilliant. Others say she clung to power too tightly and resisted the very changes China needed to survive. Either way, her rule saw even more foreign interference, a failed modernization attempt called the 100 Days Reform, and eventually, the Boxer Rebellion, a desperate, anti-foreign uprising that backfired hard. But hey, I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get into all that next time. For now, let's pause. Because this chapter? It's the tipping point. The Qing dynasty, once proud and powerful, was now bleeding from the inside and getting pushed from the outside. The cracks that started small under Qianlong had grown into full-blown fractures. What happens next is a mix of chaos, last-ditch efforts, and some seriously wild stories. Trust me, it only gets more dramatic from here. So, remember how things were spiraling in the last chapter? Yeah, it doesn't exactly get better. In fact, this part of the story is kind of like when you realize you left the stove on and your phone's about to die, just full-on panic mode. The Qing dynasty is barely holding itself together at this point, and now it's like the universe said, let's see how much worse this can get. Let's rewind a second to something I mentioned briefly before, the self-strengthening movement. This was China's "we should probably do something" phase. Officials and scholars realized that Western countries were rolling out steam engines, railroads, telegraphs, stuff that actually worked, and meanwhile, China was still relying on handwritten reports in boats powered by wind. Not exactly cutting-edge. So they tried to play catch-up. The government built arsenals, shipyards, and schools to train engineers. Sounds good, right? The problem was, well, imagine trying to run Windows 11 on a potato. You need more than just new tech, you need a system that can actually support it. And the Qing bureaucracy was still stuck in the mindset of if Confucius didn't say it, it's probably a bad idea. So yeah, progress was super slow. Some provinces did okay. But the central government kept dragging its feet. They were basically trying to wear sneakers with a robe, it just didn't fit. Meanwhile, things outside the palace weren't any better. Corruption? Still everywhere. Local officials were pocketing taxes instead of fixing roads. Farmers were still starving. And let's be real, if you dropped a modern person into one of these villages, they'd lose their minds. No running water, no electricity, no food delivery app. People were literally using chamber pots and heating homes with coal bricks. In winter? Oh man, brutal. No insulation, no heaters. You'd sleep in every piece of clothing you owned and still wake up with your eyebrows frozen, and then, out of the chaos, came another rebellion. Yep. Because why not? This one was different, though. It wasn't just peasants or religious fanatics. This one was aimed directly at the foreigners, and their influence. It was called the Boxer Rebellion. Okay, quick backstory. The Boxers were actually a group of martial artists, like literal kung fu fighters, who believed they could become bulletproof through spiritual training and rituals. Yeah, I know. It sounds like a superhero origin story. They practiced intense physical routines, burned charms, and believed they could channel spiritual energy. Honestly, it would make a great Netflix series. Anyway, they were super anti-foreigner and anti-Christian. And you kind of get why foreign powers had been carving up China like a holiday turkey. They took ports, made unequal treaties, and shoved their culture down everyone's throat. Missionaries were everywhere, and locals felt like they were losing their identity, their land, and their pride. So the Boxers start rising up. At first, it's just pockets of violence. But then it spreads like wildfire. They're burning churches, attacking missionaries, and basically saying, enough's enough. It was chaotic, violent, and honestly, kind of tragic. Because while the Boxers wanted to save China, their methods just added more fire to the mess. Now here's where things go full movie mode. The Qing court couldn't decide what to do. Some officials were like, hey, maybe we should stop this. But Empress Dowager Cixi? She eventually threw her support behind the Boxers. Big mistake, foreign powers, including Britain, France, Germany, the US, Japan, and others, were not having it. They formed an alliance, yes, like the Avengers, but more imperialist, and sent troops to crush the rebellion. Their combined armies stormed into northern China, looted cities, and occupied Beijing. It was ugly. The Boxers were no match for modern rifles and artillery. Their bulletproof charms, didn't exactly work out. The rebellion ended in disaster. The Qing government had to sign yet another humiliating treaty, the Boxer Protocol. They paid a massive indemnity, allowed foreign troops to be stationed in Beijing, and basically lost any shred of credibility they had left, and the people? Tired. Confused. Frustrated. Think about it, in just a few decades, they'd seen their once mighty empire humiliated by foreign powers, gutted by civil wars, and led by rulers who couldn't seem to agree on whether to move forward or cling to the past. Now here's the kicker. Amid all this chaos, a new generation was watching. Students, reformers, young thinkers, they were taking notes. Some were studying abroad. Others were joining underground movements. They saw the Qing as weak and outdated. And more, people started whispering a dangerous question: what if we just got rid of the dynasty altogether? That idea, once unthinkable, started picking up steam. Secret societies formed. Revolutionary pamphlets spread. People started talking about democracy, constitutional reform, even full-on republics, and remember, we're in the early 1900s now. All around the world, monarchies are falling, revolutions are rising, and the idea of the people taking power is spreading like wildfire. Back in China, the court tried one last set of reforms. Late Qing officials tried to modernize the army, create new schools, even draft the constitution. But honestly, it was too little, too late. The dynasty had lost the trust of its people. It was like putting a band-aid on a volcano, and right at the center of it all, almost symbolically, the emperor at this time was a child. Literally. The last emperor of China, Puyi, came to the throne at the age of 3. Imagine that. A toddler was technically the ruler of a crumbling empire. It would be hilarious if it weren't so sad. Meanwhile, the real power was still with Cixi, until she passed away in 1908. After that, things unraveled fast. So here we are. The Qing dynasty, once strong and proud, is now limping toward the finish line. Foreigners control key cities, rebellions have shattered the countryside, and new ideas are bubbling just below the surface. And all it's going to take is one final spark. One revolution. One moment to flip the whole system upside down, and that, my friend, is what's coming up next. Trust me, you don't want to miss this part. It's the end of 2,000 years of imperial rule. The fall of the dragon throne. And the beginning of something totally new. Ready to see how it all comes crashing down? Let's go! Okay, so let's rewind a bit. The Ming dynasty had been hanging on for a while, but by the early 1600s, things were spiraling fast. Imagine a huge, beautiful ship, the kind with golden dragons and silk sails, but it's got leaks everywhere, the crew's fighting, and the captain can't steer straight. That was the Ming. First off, the money situation? Total disaster. The government was broke. And I mean really broke. Years of war, expensive palaces, corruption, and bad management had emptied the empire's wallets. Then throw in a climate crisis. Seriously, there were droughts, floods, and even a mini ice age, and now you've got people starving, and when people go hungry, they don't just sit quietly and wait for better days. Nope. They get angry. They rise up. So guess who steps into that chaos? A guy named Li Zicheng. Now, Li Zicheng wasn't a prince. He wasn't a scholar. He wasn't even a famous general. He was just a regular guy from a poor family. His story starts with hardship. He lost his parents young, moved around a lot, and bounced between jobs. He worked as a shepherd, a soldier, even a postal worker. But when he got fired and couldn't find food, he had enough. Like thousands of others, he joined a rebel band. He wasn't a scholar. He wasn't even a famous general. He was just a regular guy from a poor family. His story starts with hardship. He lost his parents young, moved around a lot, and bounced between jobs. He worked as a shepherd, a soldier, even a postal worker, but when he got fired and couldn't find food, he had enough. Like thousands of others, he joined a rebel band. But unlike most rebels, Li had real charisma. People listened to him. They trusted him. He started small, just a few fighters here and there. But the bigger the crisis got, the more people joined. His message was simple and powerful: the Ming Emperor has failed you. I'll bring justice. I'll feed the hungry. I'll give power back to the people. And it worked. He moved fast, captured cities, gained followers. Entire towns switched sides without a fight. His army grew into the tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. And what was the Ming government doing during all this? Panicking. They tried to stop him, but the imperial armies were weak and underpaid. Many soldiers hadn't been paid in years. Some even switched sides. The emperor's court was filled with bickering officials, and honestly, no one could agree on what to do. It was like watching a slow-motion collapse. The center of this storm was Emperor Chongzhen. Now, let's talk about him for a second. Chongzhen came to power in 1627. He was young, serious, and super hardworking. He wasn't lazy. In fact, he tried really hard to clean up the mess. He kicked out corrupt officials, cracked down on waste, and even skipped fancy banquets to save money. Sounds great, right? But here's the thing: it was too late. The problems were just too big. And every time Chongzhen tried to fix one, two more popped up. Think of it like playing whack-a-mole, with blindfolds, and the moles are on fire. By the 1640s, Li Zicheng's army was unstoppable. One city after another fell. The rebels were moving north, fast. In early 1644, they reached the gates of Beijing, and this is where things take a tragic turn. Inside the Forbidden City, Chongzhen was desperate. He climbed the city walls himself to look for help, but there was none. His generals had either surrendered, vanished, or betrayed him. There was no rescue army coming. He was alone. Then, in one final, heartbreaking act, he ordered the palace women, his wives, concubines, and daughters, to be killed so they wouldn't fall into rebel hands. Some sources say he did it himself. Others say loyal guards carried out the orders. Either way, it's deeply disturbing. Chongzhen then put on his robes, climbed a hill behind the palace, Maishan, and hanged himself from a tree. He left a note pinned to his robe, apologizing to his ancestors for failing to save the dynasty. Just let that sink in. After almost 300 years of Ming rule, it ended in one silent moment, under a tree. Now picture the next morning, rebel troops marching through the streets of Beijing. No more dragon banners, no more imperial drums. Just dust, smoke, and the eerie sound of victory, followed by uncertainty. Li Zicheng declared himself the ruler. Not officially emperor, not yet, but he was clearly in charge. His dream? To start a new dynasty. A fresh start for China. But here's where things get complicated. Again, because while he was celebrating in the capital, a new force was approaching, from the northeast. Enter the Manchus. Now, these guys had been watching the chaos for years. The Manchus weren't Han Chinese, they were from Manchuria, and they'd built their own rising power up north. They had their eyes on China, and this rebellion? It was the perfect opportunity, and here's the plot twist. One of the Ming's top generals, Wu Sangui, had been guarding the northern frontier at a place called Shanhai Pass, a crucial part of the Great Wall. When Wu heard that Li Zicheng had taken Beijing, he panicked. But he didn't side with the rebels. No. He did something no one saw coming. He opened the gates to the Manchus. Yeah. He literally led a foreign army into China. Why? Historians still argue about it. Some say Li's forces hurt Wu's family. Others say Wu hated Li's politics. Or maybe Wu thought the Manchus were just more powerful and had a better chance of saving what was left of the Ming. Either way, it was a massive betrayal. The Manchu army rolled in, joined forces with Wu, and crushed Li Zicheng in a matter of weeks. Li fled the capital and disappeared into the mountains. Some say he died soon after. Others think he lived in hiding. But his dream of founding a new dynasty? Gone, and the Ming? Also gone. The Manchus took over Beijing and declared the start of the Qing dynasty. A brand new chapter for China. But let's pause here, because even though the Qing had taken the capital, not everyone was ready to give up on the Ming. Far from it. Down south, a wave of resistance was forming. Ming loyalists, former officials, generals, scholars, even merchants, refused to accept defeat. They didn't care that the emperor was dead. They believed the dynasty could still be saved. This next part of the story is both heroic and heartbreaking. You've got hidden emperors, guerrilla warfare, pirate fleets, secret scrolls, and desperate battles across mountains and rivers. It's the final breath of a dying dragon. So no, the Ming didn't just vanish overnight. It lingered, like smoke after a fire. And some people were willing to fight to the very end to keep that flame alive. Ready to dive into that? Because what's coming next is wild. So even though the capital had fallen and the emperor was gone, the story wasn't quite over. In the southern provinces, far from the Forbidden City, loyalists were rising up. They believed the Ming still had a chance. They crowned new emperors, rebuilt armies, and held on to hope, if only for a little while. In the next chapter, we'll follow their struggle. We'll see how the southern Ming tried to carry on the legacy, and how their courage, even in defeat, left a lasting mark on Chinese history. So, the Forbidden City had fallen, the last Ming emperor was gone, and the Qing dynasty had taken over. Most people would say, well, that's the end, right? Not quite. Because even though Beijing was in enemy hands, the story of the Ming wasn't finished. Not yet. Down in the south of China, there were still people who refused to give up. Officials, generals, scholars, even regular townsfolk, they were loyal to the Ming and couldn't accept that everything they knew had just vanished. These weren't just rebels. They saw themselves as the last defenders of a rightful order. They believed the dynasty still had life left in it. This period is known as the Southern Ming. And trust me, it's full of twists. After Emperor Chongzhen's death, the surviving Ming court scrambled to regroup. They ran south, away from the chaos in the north, trying to find a safe place to set up a new base of power. Pretty soon, they declared a new emperor, Zhu Yusong, a relative of Chongzhen. He became known as the Hongwu Emperor. Was this guy a strong leader? Not really. That he ruled from Nanjing, but his court was divided, his generals didn't get along, and the Qing were coming fast. By 1645, just a year later, the Qing army arrived and crushed his forces. Zhu Yusong was captured and executed. Brutal. You'd think that would be the end, right? Nope. Next, a new Ming prince stepped up, Zhu Yujian, who became the Hongwu Emperor. This guy tried to rally support from the southern provinces. He even teamed up with a well-known military leader named Jin Zhilong. But guess what? The Qing were still one step ahead. In 1646, they stormed the region, and Zhu Yujian was captured. He refused to surrender. He was executed too. Yeah, not a lot of happy endings in this chapter, but the loyalists kept trying. More Ming princes were crowned in different parts of the south. It was chaotic. Some historians call it emperor roulette because new ones kept popping up and then getting defeated. Over and over, and while most of these rulers didn't last long, their stories tell us something powerful. People really believed in the Ming. Even in the face of certain defeat, they kept going. Now here's where it gets interesting. Let's talk about one of the most legendary figures from this time, Jin Chenggong. You might know him by his nickname, Koxinga. He was the son of Jin Zhilong, the guy we just mentioned earlier. But while Jin Zhilong eventually surrendered to the Qing, his son Koxinga did the opposite. He went all in on defending the Ming. Koxinga wasn't your typical commander. He was bold, smart, and, most importantly, he had ships. Lots of ships. He basically controlled the southeastern coast of China and had a strong naval fleet. The Ming court had crumbled, but Koxinga decided to keep the dream alive. He called himself a loyal servant of the Ming and refused to recognize the Qing. He led daring attacks against Qing outposts. He raided coastal cities. He disrupted trade. But most famously, in 1661, he sailed across the sea and conquered Taiwan, which at the time was controlled by the Dutch. That's right, he kicked out the Dutch colonizers and turned Taiwan into a base for Ming loyalists. He declared it a safe haven for those who still believed in the old dynasty. Can you imagine that? The Ming dynasty surviving, not in China, but on an island across the sea? Pretty wild, right? Koxinga died shortly after that victory, but his family kept ruling Taiwan for a while. They held out against the Qing for another 2 decades before finally surrendering in the 1680s. With Koxinga gone, and the last holdouts crushed, the Ming dream finally faded out. The Qing dynasty now had full control of China, but the southern Ming wasn't just about failed battles and short reigns. It was about resistance, loyalty, and the refusal to let go of the past. Even centuries later, these loyalists were remembered as heroes, people who fought not for power or fame, but for an idea. For a legacy, which brings us to the bigger question. What was that legacy? Well, let's take a step back and look at the Ming Dynasty as a whole. They ruled for nearly 3 centuries. That's longer than the Roman Empire lasted in the West. Think about that for a second. They rebuilt the Great Wall. They created the Forbidden City. They sent Genghis' giant treasure ships across the Indian Ocean, way before Europe even figured out how to sail around Africa. They made art that people still admire today, blue and white porcelain, intricate scrolls, stunning architecture. Their books, science, and printing techniques shaped generations, but they also made mistakes. Big ones. They got too comfortable. Too isolated. In the later years, the court became obsessed with tradition and control. Innovation slowed down. Trade was restricted. Outside ideas were shut out. And when crisis hit, like climate change, rebellion, or invasion, they were too slow to respond. So yeah, the Ming Dynasty was both great and fragile. It soared to amazing heights, but when it fell hard. And maybe that's what makes the story so powerful. It's not just about emperors and palaces. It's about people. About ambition and failure. About dreams that are too big to hold. And about those who try to protect those dreams, no matter the cost. And now, let's end with one final image. Picture a scholar in the south of China, hiding in the mountains. He's carrying a scroll, one of the last with the Ming imperial seal. He finds a quiet cave, lights a single lantern, and seals the scroll inside a wooden box. He buries it under stone, whispering a prayer to heaven, hoping that maybe, someday, someone will find it, not to bring the dynasty back, but to remember, because even after the thrones are empty and the banners are gone, stories remain. And the Ming? Oh, their story is unforgettable. So, what do you think? Was the Ming Dynasty a symbol of glory, or a warning about the dangers of isolation? Maybe both?